So, one lesson you learn from life, say when you have interviews or talk to other people, is it's usually all about them. If you want to go for an interview with somebody, you impress them, you want to learn about them and tell them that you like all the things about them. Most people want to hear about themselves. When we talk about the future, it's usually, honestly, mostly about us. We want to talk about the future as it reflects on us. We want to tell a morality tale of how things will go great, and it's the people who we think should be celebrated who are responsible for that, or things are going to go terrible and it's the people we want to criticize who should be blamed. We want to talk about heavens and hells in the future because that most dramatically lets us give credit for the good things or blame for the bad things. We're not that actually interested in who these future people are, what lives they'll live, and what they'll care about. Which of course makes sense when we talk about Africa or the Himalayas. We're still mostly talking about those things as they reflect on us. We can be a heroic traveler of the world, and that reflects on our insight and our wide-mindedness, and we don't actually care about the people in the Himalayas themselves. We care about what traveling there tells about us. So similarly about the future, we care about what the future says about us, largely. So I think that's why we focus on such heaven and hell scenarios for the future. It lets us tell morality tales. Human minds actually have distinctive near modes and far modes. In near mode, we're focused on here, now, today, me, my feelings, the thing, my hunger, my sexual arousal, etc. And in far mode, we're focused on grand, abstract goals, long distance, long times, and we tend, when we think about other people and what they should be doing later on in far mode, and we're moralistic and we have principles and we have high hopes or high fears, but when we think about ourselves today at this moment, we're more practical, we're more focused on the constraints and the messy details. So when people a century ago thought about us, they thought about us typically in grand moralistic terms. They thought we were in a few key categories. Our choices would be few and stark. They thought their theories would apply to us consistently and with relatively few deviations. But when we're here right now, we know that our world is very messy. There's a lot of variations, there's a lot of possibilities, and it's not a heaven or hell. It's sort of muddling through in the middle. And that's what the future will be like too, certainly from their point of view. But when we look ahead in far mode. We think about small number of categories, grand theories we project. We think about large social distances, so we think that they're sort of going to be really weird compared to us, or spatial distances, they'll spread out into space or far away. And we don't think about them so much how they'll see themselves in near mode, up close. Utopia is a wish, and it's a morality tale. Utopias are much more about talking about what we admire or disapprove of in our society than they are about actually imagining a functional, different society. So the building behind me is a church, and people use churches as an imagined utopia. They want to create this ideal society of people who treat each other nice and tell each other good things as a mode for sort of how the rest of us should be treating each other. But we're much less interested in making a society that's all church. And when we do make societies that are all church, well, they're kind of odd. And we realize that we've forgotten all sorts of details we care about because we were sort of setting up this abstract ideal. So when we think ahead toward the future, we project heavens and hells. The heavens we project sort of represent all the best ideals that we want to uphold in the world around us. And they aren't necessarily the ideals somebody living in that society would very much focus on in their world, because it would be much less important to them. Utopias from 3 centuries ago were often about making sure the poor got fed, because they had a lot of starving people, and a utopia was a place where nobody starved. We live in a world where nobody starves, but we don't think of it as utopia, because once that issue is solved, it's not something we think very much about. And so our world doesn't count as a utopia for us, and whatever problems we have and that our descendants will have solved, it won't necessarily count as a utopia for them either. So what we often count as a utopia is immortality, we say. It sure is a shame to die. Imagine a world where people didn't have to die. Wouldn't that be great? And for us, it would be great. But a world where people didn't have to die, to them, wouldn't be a utopia. It would just be the world they live in. And they would continue on living and sometimes dying, of course, because just because you don't have to die doesn't mean you don't sometimes die. just because we have enough food to eat means we don't sometimes starve. Again, utopia is much more about the ideals we want to project. When we talk about a utopia and we discuss a utopia, we're really discussing secondhand, indirectly, what are the ideals we most want to uphold in our society. So my big project lately has been to take a particular technology vision of the future called whole brain emulation and try to work out as many social details as I can, what the world would actually be like from their mundane point of view, from their lives' point of view. And there are many elements of it that people find disturbing. There are also many elements that they should find encouraging, but many people are not willing to take that as a package. Some things get better and other things get worse. Because the future is supposed to be this place where all our problems are solved. Because the future is supposed to be held up as either a lesson of what we could all do if we all join together and do what we're supposed to, or a warning of what we will all fail if we don't do what we're supposed to. And the idea that it'll be muddled through in the middle with a bunch of good things and some other bad things seems intolerably compromised. So I have to work to try to get people to at least pause and look at a world where a bunch of things are great and a bunch of things are not so great, and say, okay, that may be the likely outcome, and maybe on the margin we should push a little one way or the other. They're more likely to say, no, let's clean the slate, let's start all over again, let's take a big chance to make sure it's really great, because that's not remotely near what we wanted. Again, dystopias are morality tales, they're warnings, they're not what actually happens. So even if you take the famous dystopias of our history, like 1984 or something, it's set up as a way to make it feel to you as if it's just horrifying and unacceptable. But in fact, to the people who actually lived in such a world, it wouldn't be so bad. Most of them aren't trying to overthrow their government. Most of them aren't trying to dig up old records that are being erased. They're just getting on with their life. And it would be okay. Maybe there are, of course, things about the society that are regrettable, and we should all try to be warned about avoiding them. But again, in order to make a dire warning that people feel strongly emotionally motivated to follow, you have to make it this horror, this hell. But, you know, heavens and hells of fiction are just much more extreme than the heavens and hells of real life. Real people who are even quadriplegics, they manage to go ahead and have happy lives. If they're a happy personality, they smile a lot. That's just true of ordinary people. They can deal with a lot of harm. And similarly, being a billionaire, those people aren't always so happy. It is good to be a billionaire. I'm sure you'd choose it if you had the option, but you know, it doesn't make everything better. It doesn't make all your childhood friends love you. It doesn't mean you never get rejected in love. It means that some things are better. People have been telling stories for a very long time, and stories are selected for other than being realistic. So we tell stories not about exactly the world we see around us. We tell stories that are mixtures of elements we see around us, so they're familiar. We actually care much less about what's going to happen than about what stories we can tell about what will happen, and how the future might fit the stories we like best. If I could tell you that there are hobbits and we will see hobbits, you might be much more fascinated by what's going to happen than telling you that we'll have 5 wings or 3 legs or all sorts of other strange things, because they don't fit so much in the stories, you know. People have been telling stories for a long time, and those stories are designed to be interesting. They're designed to fit with morality tales, and they're designed to help us tell who's good and bad, and to say yay us and bad them. We do all these things with stories, and myths are almost just extreme versions of stories, where we go even farther away and have even more dramatic events, even more extreme people and creatures and things like that to tell a dramatic story. So mythology is basically extreme storytelling. So how does the future fit with myths? Well, the future is going to change a lot of things, and many of the ways that we change and society changes will happen to be in the direction that myths have made extreme, because myths have stretched characters and scenarios in order to make them dramatic and extreme. So myths have great big monsters who can move fast and smash things, and crazy abilities like breathing fire or shooting lasers out of their eyes. You just add all sorts of crazy abilities to monsters and myths in order to make dramatic stories. Myths have fantastic societies, cities under the water, cities on the moon, cities that float in the sky. They have societies that are modeled on old mythic orders or of societies modeled on democracy. We just take all the different elements we find engaging, we put them together in a mishmash of a story to make a dramatic thing. Now, the future will be different in many ways. The future will have all sorts of things that move in extreme directions, but it won't come in the same packages that make a dramatic story. So, for example, myths have gods. Myths have powerful creatures. In The Lord of the Rings, when there's a battle, well, there's all these little soldiers, then there's a few really powerful heroes or warriors, and they have a disproportionate effect, certainly compared to real warriors. In a real war where there's 1 million soldiers, the top 10 soldiers don't make that much of a difference. But in Lord of the Rings, the top 10 soldiers make all that difference. So in the real future, there will be more variety of creatures. We're going to have bigger creatures and smaller creatures, more variety in intrinsic capacity. So for example, when we can run brains at different speeds, some brains will run 10, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times faster than others. And those brains will be vastly more capable of thinking things. You can have bodies that are the size of mountains or bodies that are the size of microscopic insects. And those will be a vast range of body size. But in mythology, the biggest physical creatures are the strongest and ones to fear, and the tiny ones, well, they're not much to worry about at all. But that's not true of the actual future creatures. For actual future creatures, being small means being fast and powerful. And being big means being slow and clumsy and easy to evade. And so in mythology, you have to change around what actually, the real variety of creatures that will exist in the future won't match nicely onto the kinds of creature packages we tell to make a dramatic story. We also, of course, tend to tell morality tales about the kind, downtrodden person with modest resources who helps out, and then the big, arrogant powers who want to dominate but don't appreciate the small things in life, etc. We tell stories like that about rich people in our world. And the world in the future, there will be powerful creatures and small ones and rich ones and poor, but they don't map easily onto the ones who are kind and the ones who are domineering and the ones who are friendly and the ones who are unfriendly. Those are all the correlations we put in stories so that we can tell a morality tale about, even if you're powerful, you should still be kind to the rest of us.
That's interesting. On your blog, Overcoming Bias, you've got like Odysseus strapped to and his men, like tied to the mast and to different parts of the boats, while sirens are trying to sing them into submission.
Absolutely.
And the interesting thing is that the sirens aren't just singing like irrational things.
Very sensible things.
Exactly.
They're telling truths.
They're telling truths. They're talking about all of knowledge.
Yes, indeed. Sure. So one of the great myths in stories is an adventure for discovering the truth. And the hero who has the brave inclination and insight to find the truth and tell it. That's a great hero story, and we all love to be the hero who tells the truth. But in fact, we're surrounded with truth we refuse to look at. In our world, we don't reward people who tell us uncomfortable truths. We punish them and send them away because our world is full of uncomfortable truths we'd rather not look at. In fact, it's quite a dangerous life to find truths and tell them to people who aren't interested in hearing them. Yes, the future will know many truths. It'll know many truths relative to what we now think. They will understand physics, even economics, psychology better. And we might hope of all the problems in our society and all the things that are going wrong. When we finally know the truth, then we'll be happier, then we'll fix things, and then we'll solve the problems. Well, some problems we'll solve because we know the truth, and other problems we'll create because we know the truth, and they won't necessarily be happier because they know the truth. There are many ways in which we are happy because we are deluded. Because we can each tell ourselves that inside us is a hero who would come out if only we had given the right chance. And knowing for sure that we are not actually heroes. We are the same flawed humans everybody else is and has always been. It's somewhat deflating. I love stories. I love myths. I love adventure stories. Adventure stories are about, some heroes ripped away from their ordinary life, off on a grand quest because big things are at stake. They meet strange people, they go to strange places. They're cut away from their usual support. So if it's a child, the parent isn't there to help them. If it's a citizen, the government isn't there to help them. They're on their own. If there's a fight, they have to do it themselves. They can't call the police. An adventure story takes you away from your ordinary places and puts you into a strange place. And it's great for escapism. If you're stuck in your own world and bored with your work life and you want to just get away for a few hours, a story will take you away. And so when we think about the future in story terms, we tend to think about it in those terms. Of course, for us, the future is this place that's far away from where we are now. We'd like to imagine going there and being torn away from our usual life and made something a little exciting and different. But for the people of the future, it is their life. It is their ordinary place. They will tell adventure stories, but not in the world they're living in. They'll tell an adventure story somewhere else because to them it's as familiar as your world is to you. Your world is a fantastic adventure setting for people from 500 years ago. If someone from 500 years ago could have told a story about your life and setting and then set of dramatic events, it would make a fantastic story describing the various things they went past and what they did, because it was all so fascinating and different from them. But to you, it's familiar, it's ordinary. You have cars, you have radios, you have phones, you have computers, you have shoes, etc. And that's not a notable thing to you, that's just ordinary things. So the most important thing to understand about the future is that it's not an adventure story. It's not a mythological place to them. They live there. They go to sleep every night, they get up in the morning, they do their job. They want it to be boring in many ways, just like you want your world to be boring. You wouldn't want monsters to come down the streets all the time or wars to be happening all the time, etc. That would get in your way, that would make your life miserable. You want to tell an adventure story and go off in that thing, but when you come back to your bed, you want it to be the bed you saw last night. You want it to still be warm. You don't want excitement in your bed when you go to sleep. And to the future, that's the world they will have and that you should wish for them. You should wish for the future to have a boring world to them. A simple, safe world that they can live in and count on and live their lives and fall in love and tell stories and take a bath and have a energetic, ambitious, difficult perhaps career. They will work in the future. Adventure stories. Stories today almost always about play. They're almost always about leisure and what we do with our friends. And there's very few stories about work because, of course, well, we're working all day. We don't want another story about work. We want to escape from work. But we get a lot of value out of work. We get a lot of meaning in our lives out of work. Work often makes us who we are and what matters to us. And that will be true of them in the future too. They will work. They will try to build things. They will attempt to solve problems. And that will give meaning to their life. And it will be a place where they build up skills and then they apply them and they achieve things, and they will then be proud of themselves and feel they had a life worth living, and even when it ends, think that their life meant something. But even though you look at it, you say, well, that's boring. You were an accountant. A world future full of accountants and lawyers and bus drivers and other things, that can be a wonderful future place for those people. Please don't try to make the future into an adventure story so it sounds like an interesting place for you to think about. Try to make the future a place for them to live in comfortably. I mean, it's a similar thing in far mode, we are more principled. So if we imagine a future where there's wealth inequality or a future where there's a dominant political class, we think, well, they should rebel. They should have rebellion. They shouldn't tolerate that, because that would make for a better story. That more upholds our morals and our norms. But of course, we live in worlds with inequality and dominant political classes, and we don't rebel. And maybe we shouldn't, because these high ideals we uphold are ideals we uphold more for other people than ourselves. Other people should stick to them and be principled, but we know that there are complexities and costs, and we make trade-offs. And often that means we don't rebel, and we accept a world that's not perfect, doesn't live up to our ideals, but it's pretty good. So when people think big picture, long-term, big space, they think often in terms of the most fundamental moral principles or social norms and their grandest hopes and their deepest commitments. And nature comes up a lot in that. We are foragers. Our minds and our bodies were made to be foragers. And we're alienated from that. First, we became farmers, and now we're industrialists. And our society isn't as much like the forager world as feels natural. And we often notice that. And so when we want to be comforted, we go back to nature. And when we think about what an ideal utopian society would be, it often includes a lot of nature. If you imagine a utopian campus, there'll be sure to be lots of trees and grass, so that it feels like it's maintaining our sources with nature. We feel more comfortable and that things are right with the world when they are more like the way they once were for our forager ancestors. Our forager ancestors were more egalitarian than we are. They more sort of made sure everybody in the group spoke up and had a voice about what to do. Nobody was allowed to overtly dominate. They shared food. They were in contact with nature all the time. They were physically fit, constantly exercising. Their mental jobs were very challenging mentally. Our ancestors had lives that we admire in many abstract ways and would like our world to go back to if only we could. Of course, our ancestors were also very poor and starved sometimes, and we don't want that. But in many ways, when we are idealistic about what the future should be like, we want it to go back to our more ideal forager ways. And that includes more nature, more contact with nature, nature that's more on its own terms, and we're just a smaller part of it. Smaller groups, less big organizations, more autonomy, more democracy. Those are all feel-good ideals that make perfect sense for people who feel alienated from their natural environment. The future will not be that way. We will continue to get more alienated. We continue to evolve to worlds that are further and further from what was natural for our ancestors. It really can't be any other way if we are well adapted to our new world. We will develop new capacities, and that means we'll find new forms of organization, new ways to structure the physical world, new ways to structure society, new ways to structure work and pleasure and even reproduction. And those will move further and further away from what we used to be and what was natural. And that means we will more and more feel this alienation between what felt natural to a forager and the world we sit in and live in. Now, maybe eventually our nature will change, and we will change what we actually want and like, so that we want and like whatever strange things are in our new world. But in some sense, those people will no longer be human, in the sense of liking the same kind of things we do. So you have a choice of a future of humans who are more alienated from their world, or a future of non-humans who are adapted to their world and find it to be beautiful and natural, and your world to be the strange one. So another key point is that as we get further and further away from nature, we are going to destroy nature. We mostly leave nature alone in our world when we don't want much from it. Places where we don't want to put a building or a road or a harbor, we leave it alone and we use it as we can, cheaply and easily, to make a farm or to graze. But when we want things out of land, when we want to use things in the water, we do, and if nature gets hurt, we typically let it be hurt. And that will become all the more true in the future because our descendants will need nature less. We at least pause and say, if we destroy nature, we will die. So let's be careful about using things so that we don't destroy nature. We're not that careful, but we're moderately careful. In the future, when we no longer depend on nature as much, when we're not biological beings like this, who need food in the way others do, we simply will not need nature as much, and we will be less careful about it, and in large part destroy it. Right, so many people who see what I'm saying as being realistic find it means all the more reason to build up your moral fervor, to resist and oppose, and to yell from the rooftops that we must stop, or else all will be lost. I'm not saying that. I'm saying accept most of these changes. You won't be able to change them anyway. People way overestimate how much influence we will have over the future world. Someday maybe the world can coordinate together and have a big council to decide what the world should become and make choices it can implement that will actually affect what happens in a big way. We are not in that world today. We live in a decentralized world with very little coordination. We have a United Nations that's barely able to do a few things that are very easy to understand and familiar. And there's a lot of big important things it doesn't do to coordinate. Big changes in which way the future is going is just not something we are up to coordinating to deal with at the moment. We are mostly on a trajectory, riding a train. Nobody is driving the train. And nobody can even get up and there is no driver's seat. Just like Earth hurtling through the solar system, we are hurtling on a technology train that's moving us forward, that's changing things and changing us. And fortunately, it's not so bad. But there's a number of things that will get worse and a lot of other things that will get better. The one overall positive, by far for me, is that there'll just be a lot more of us in the future. A lot more of creatures like you and me, struggling through, muddling through, having okay lives, sometimes suffering, sometimes joyous. But there'll be a lot more of them. We are billions, they will be trillions, they will be quadrillions. They will be vast and many, and we will grow. Society is growing. Society has been growing for a while. And because it's growing, many things go well. There's a lot of antagonisms and hostilities that are muted by the fact that we're growing. The country next door might be a little richer than we are, but we are richer than our ancestors were, and our descendants will be richer than we are. And so we don't go to war so much to grab our neighbor's stuff as to stay home and grow. If we stop growing, if we slow our growth a lot, such that we look more greedily at our neighbor, a lot of things that go well in our society won't go so well. And so I think it's important to stay on a growth trajectory, to keep growing and keep improving, because if we stop that, we'll risk many things. There are many elements of society that would like to stop change. Change is disruptive. Change throws things out of balance. People who were in control are no longer in control. And so people who are at the top often want to stop change so that they can stay on top. And if society were changing very slowly, it would be much easier for them to do that. There would seem to be much less to be gained by allowing change. In a very slow growing world, what's to be gained by allowing a little growth? It's a small thing. What we mainly care about is who's on top. But in a society that's growing, then we all see that there's something for us all to be gained by allowing change, by allowing competition, by allowing some to disrupt and displace others, because that's part of the process of overall growth and improvement. So I think it's important for many risks that we face that we continue to grow so that we can get past our current risky stage. We are still very small as a society. There are still some big things that could happen that would wipe us out. And a bigger society would be more able to handle many of the things that could happen to us. At the moment, a power outage could wipe out an industrialized economy, but a bigger society could have more interdependent power sources, more backup sources, more ways to do things. In a society now, if we had a pandemic, we only have a limited number of biological researchers who could study the pandemic and try to solve it before it wiped us all out. The bigger we were, the more people who could study those things and make sure that they found a solution in time. Being richer as a society overall gives us more resources to defend against a lot of things that could hurt us, and those risks are not growing at the same rate. Pandemics will not for a long time get harder to solve because we are richer and bigger. And so the bigger and richer we are, the more we can deal with it. Asteroids could come smash us all, and the bigger and richer we are, the more we're able to find the asteroids in time and prevent them. So my biggest hope to avoid risk of destroying us all and losing all that we've gained is that we grow as quickly as we can to become bigger and more powerful and able to withstand further disruptions. Our universe is 13 billion years old. We have come a very long way. The Industrial Revolution is only a few hundred years old. Most of the things we can think about worrying about that will change in society will happen over the next 100 years or so. And it was important that we think about them when we adapt to them. But it's also important to realize that they won't protect us from the next 100 billion years or the next 100 trillion years. The universe can grow and expand for a very long time ahead, and we will improve vastly, and our capabilities will improve, and the problems we face will improve ahead. So we can do our best now to make sure we don't destroy ourselves in the near future, and that we can anticipate the next transition and perhaps the transition after that, and try to find ways to adapt to them and make sure we don't destroy ourselves or at least have fast wars and genocides as a consequence. But we can't, all in one fell swoop, ensure the entire future. It's too much to try for. And it's dangerous, I think, to think that we can. To that we could somehow take the entire future in our hands, tie it in a bow, and ensure that nothing bad will ever happen again. I think we have to accept that we don't know where it's going, and we can know maybe the next transition, but we don't know what'll happen after that, and we'll have to let them, our future dependents, learn the next set of problems and deal with them. We face a very long road ahead. We can't see all the way to the end, nor should we try. Let's see down the road a bit, see what obstacles lie ahead, prepare ourselves for those, and when we get there and past them, then look ahead to the further obstacles down the road. Look, I'm as selfish as the next guy. I hope I'm in the future and that I do okay. My first priority or hope about the future is that I survive to live in it, and then it treats me okay. And maybe if I don't survive it, at least remembers me. But beyond that, for the sake of future folk, I hope their world is bigger and richer and more powerful, and therefore leads to more future folk after that. Because there's a vast, rich potential future ahead, and a vast number of trillions, quadrillions, far more creatures who could live happy lives if only we make sure we get through this rough time nearby. So I hope that we get by our time, but I also hope we set up things so that the next generation can do better. And what I most care about the next generation is not just that they be happy, what they set up the generation after them, and that no one drop the ball and give up on the vast potential future because it's more convenient for them at the moment to save some current problem.